Born of the Virginia soil, 1743 to 1757. On a quiet spring day, April 13, 1743, a child was born in the lush green fields of Shadwell, Virginia. Thomas Jefferson entered the world as the third of 10 children, into a privileged yet modestly rural household. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a respected surveyor and planter, strong, self-taught, and ambitious. His mother, Jane Randolph, came from one of Virginia's most socially prominent families. These two lineages, one of frontier grit and the other of aristocratic tradition, melded into the boy who would one day help define a nation. The Jefferson family home was built on the edge of the frontier, surrounded by the blue ridges of the Appalachians and thick, untamed forests. From a young age, Thomas roamed the land with curiosity. He watched enslaved laborers work in the fields and began to sense, however distantly, the contradictions embedded in the world around him. Jefferson's early childhood was filled with books, nature, and quiet contemplation. By the time he was 5, he was already learning Latin, Greek, and French under private tutors. He showed a particular fascination with classical texts, Enlightenment thought, and ancient history. These were not just subjects. They were the scaffolding of his future vision for America. Education and Enlightenment, 1757 to 1767. When Thomas was just 14, tragedy struck. His father died suddenly, leaving behind thousands of acres of land and dozens of enslaved people, including the inheritance of Monticello's hilltop, where Thomas would one day build his famed estate. Young Jefferson was sent to a boarding school in Williamsburg, where he began studying under the influential Reverend James Morey. It was here that he was introduced to the rationalism of the Enlightenment, reason over superstition, liberty over tyranny. These ideas would ignite a flame that burned within him for the rest of his life. In 1760, at the age of 17, Jefferson enrolled at the College of William and Mary. There, he devoured knowledge. He studied mathematics, philosophy, law, architecture, and science. He played the violin, danced, and mingled with scholars, learning the refined customs of the Virginia elite. But beneath the polish was a restless intellect, absorbing Locke, Bacon, and Newton, questioning monarchy, embracing the rights of man. He also began collecting books, laying the foundation for one of the largest personal libraries in America, one that would later seed the Library of Congress. By the time he completed his legal studies in 1767, Jefferson had earned a reputation as a brilliant, driven, and deeply thoughtful young man, one destined for public life. A Love Story and a Private Life, 1768 to 1782. In the winter of 1772, Thomas Jefferson married Martha Wales Skelton, a young widow of great beauty, grace, and refinement. Their marriage, though brief, was deeply affectionate. Together, they settled in Monticello, a home Jefferson designed himself, perched on a Virginia hilltop, surrounded by orchards, farmland, and enslaved laborers. Martha brought with her not only love but also property, including more enslaved individuals from her father's estate. Among them was Sally Hemings, Martha's half-sister, born of her father's relationship with an enslaved woman. This complicated inheritance would later become a deeply controversial chapter in Jefferson's life. The couple had 6 children, but only 2 daughters, Martha Patsy and Mary Polly, survived into adulthood. Jefferson adored his children, raising them with great tenderness, reading to them, teaching them music and languages. But the joy was short-lived. In 1782, after a long illness, Martha Jefferson died at just 33 years old. Heartbroken, Jefferson retreated into deep mourning. He burned their letters, rarely spoke of her again, and for weeks he could barely function, riding horseback alone for hours in grief-stricken silence. This period of profound sorrow changed him. He would never remarry, and though his public life was just beginning, a certain sadness would always linger behind the idealism. The Statesman emerges, 1769 to 1776. By his late 20s, Jefferson had already begun his political career, elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1769. Quiet but persuasive, he avoided public speaking yet made a strong impression through his writing, eloquent, forceful, and steeped in Enlightenment ideals. The colonies were seething under British rule. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and increasing tensions stirred revolutionary fervor. Jefferson emerged as a voice of resistance, not through fiery speeches, but through pen and parchment. He drafted resolutions condemning British tyranny, supporting non-importation, and promoting self-governance. In 1774, Jefferson published a summary view of the rights of British America, a radical pamphlet that argued the colonies were not British subjects by nature, but independent people tied only by voluntary compact. It was bold, unprecedented, and widely circulated throughout the colonies and even in Britain. 2 years later, Jefferson was sent as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. He was just 33, yet when the time came to draft the Declaration of Independence, it was Jefferson whom the committee turned to. He sat in a boarding house room on Market Street, penning the words that would echo through the ages. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The document was not only a call for political freedom, it was a philosophical manifesto. Jefferson's voice, shaped by Locke, Rousseau, and classical antiquity, now shaped the destiny of a nation. Diplomat in the Age of Revolution, 1784 to 1789. In the aftermath of the American Revolution, Jefferson was appointed as a trade commissioner to Europe in 1784, and later as minister to France, succeeding Benjamin Franklin. With his daughter Patsy and later Polly by his side, he stepped into the heart of European Enlightenment at a moment of historic upheaval. Jefferson roamed Parisian salons, conversed with philosophers, artists, and scientists, and deepened his admiration for reason, liberty, and culture. He developed friendships with figures like the Marquis de Lafayette and witnessed firsthand the growing storm of revolution that would soon engulf France. The French ideals of liberty echoed his own, but Jefferson also grew cautious of mob rule and violent extremes. During his time abroad, tragedy struck again. His youngest daughter Lucy died in Virginia, compounding the grief that had followed Martha's death years earlier. While in France, Jefferson's complex relationship with Sally Hemings began, an enslaved teenager who had accompanied his daughter Polly from Virginia. The relationship would last for decades, raising questions about Jefferson's public ideals versus private life, an internal contradiction that still defines his legacy. By the time Jefferson returned to America in 1789, the Constitution had been drafted. The young republic was taking form, and Jefferson was once again called to serve. The vice presidency and the rise of political division, 1797 to 1800. Thomas Jefferson became America's first Secretary of State under George Washington in 1790, but ideological differences soon led him into bitter conflict with Alexander Hamilton. Where Hamilton believed in a strong central government and close ties with Britain, Jefferson stood firm for agrarian independence, states' rights, and friendship with France. These opposing visions gave rise to America's first political parties: the Federalists, led by Hamilton and John Adams, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson. In the election of 1796, Jefferson lost the presidency to Adams but became vice president, a role then awarded to the runner-up. The position brought him little power and much frustration, as Adams governed with Federalist allies and pushed for measures like the Alien and Sedition Acts, laws Jefferson considered an assault on liberty. He began writing secretly, preparing to challenge Adams in the next election. In his letters, he warned of monarchist tendencies among the Federalists and rallied support for the Republican cause. In 1800, after a fierce and bitter campaign, Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in the Electoral College. The decision went to the House of Representatives, which after 36 ballots, elected Jefferson as the third president of the United States. It was a peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties, what Jefferson would call a revolution of 1800. The President of the People, 1801 to 1805. Thomas Jefferson entered the presidency determined to restore what he believed were the true principles of the Revolution: limited government, individual rights, and national unity. He broke tradition by walking to his inauguration, dressed plainly, signaling a more democratic tone for the presidency. His first term was defined by one of the greatest real estate deals in history, the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, Jefferson bought the vast Louisiana territory from France for $15 million, doubling the size of the United States. Though it stretched his own interpretation of constitutional powers, he seized the opportunity to secure land for future generations of American farmers, the backbone of his vision. To explore the new land, Jefferson commissioned Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to embark on a legendary expedition to the Pacific. Their journey, filled with maps, scientific discoveries, and Native American encounters, fulfilled Jefferson's long-held dream of westward exploration. Domestically, Jefferson repealed internal taxes, reduced the national debt, and shrank the military, governing with what he called wise and frugal government. His policies made him widely popular, and he won re-election in 1804 by a landslide. Yet cracks began to appear beneath the surface. Liberty and contradiction, 1805 to 1809. In Jefferson's second term, his presidency grew more complicated. International tensions, especially with Britain and France, disrupted American trade. To avoid war, Jefferson passed the Embargo Act of 1807, halting all U.S. exports. Though intended as peaceful resistance, it crippled the American economy and angered merchants across the nation. At home, Jefferson faced rising criticism, even from former allies. Federalists accused him of weakness, while others felt his strict views on government were failing in the face of real-world pressures. But the deepest contradiction remained at Monticello. Jefferson, the author of All Men Are Created Equal, continued to own over 600 enslaved people during his lifetime. He expressed doubts about slavery in private and took small legislative actions against its expansion, but never freed most of those under his control. His relationship with Sally Hemings, believed to have produced several children, was kept hidden, yet shaped by power imbalance and silence. He saw slavery as a moral evil, yet feared emancipation would tear the country apart. Like many founders, he deferred the problem to future generations. In this, Jefferson became both the dreamer of liberty and the prisoner of his own contradictions. As his presidency ended in 1809, he retired quietly to Monticello, content to leave the storm of politics behind, but not free from the judgments of history. Returned to Monticello, 1809 to 1815. When Thomas Jefferson stepped down from the presidency in 1809, he returned to Monticello not as a ruler, but as a citizen of the republic he had helped to create. The years of power had aged him, yet his mind remained alert. Surrounded by his books, instruments, and sprawling garden, Jefferson immersed himself in the quiet rhythms of country life. He resumed his lifelong passions: architecture, agriculture, invention, and letter writing. He designed new tools, studied weather patterns, experimented with crops, and managed the daily operations of his plantation. Monticello was his laboratory, but also his paradox, a home built by brilliance, maintained by bondage. The financial burden of maintaining Monticello and his growing debts weighed heavily on him. Like many planters of his time, Jefferson was land-rich but cash-poor. He sold land, took out loans, and struggled to balance his ideals of simplicity with the demands of his estate. Despite personal hardship, he remained intellectually active, exchanging letters with prominent figures, debating philosophy and science, and observing the growing pains of the young republic. Jefferson was no longer a politician, but he was still very much a founder, shaping American identity through thought and principle, even in retreat. The University of Virginia and the Pursuit of Knowledge, 1816 to 1825. In his final years, Jefferson turned to what he believed was his most enduring legacy: education. He envisioned a public university in Virginia, free from religious control, where young minds could pursue reason and inquiry without dogma. It would be, in his words, an act of eternal good. With characteristic energy, he designed the buildings himself: red brick pavilions, white colonnades, and domed rotundas inspired by ancient Rome. He planned the curriculum, chose faculty, and outlined the university's values. In 1819, the University of Virginia was chartered. Jefferson called it the hobby of my old age. But it was more than that. It was a culmination of his life's philosophy, that an educated citizenry was essential to a free republic. When the university opened in 1825, Jefferson, now 82, watched with pride. The campus reflected his belief in classical balance, rational order, and civic virtue. It stood as a physical embodiment of Enlightenment ideals on American soil. Even as his health declined, Jefferson continued to correspond with scholars, students, and reformers. He mentored the next generation with the same fire that had once guided a revolution. The Adams-Jefferson Letters and a Lasting Friendship, 1812 to 1825. One of the most remarkable chapters in Jefferson's later life was the renewed friendship with John Adams. Once allies, then fierce rivals, Jefferson and Adams had spent years estranged, hardened by politics and betrayal. But in 1812, prompted by mutual friend Dr. Benjamin Rush, Adams wrote to Jefferson. Jefferson replied with warmth, and over the next 14 years, they exchanged over 150 letters, deep, witty, philosophical conversations between two titans of the American experiment. They debated revolution, liberty, religion, government, and mortality. Their letters reflected the wisdom of age and the healing power of shared history. Adams was blunt and humorous. Jefferson was elegant and idealistic. Together, they offered a window into the mind of the revolution. Their correspondence became a national treasure, a testament to reconciliation, mutual respect, and the enduring bonds of principle. It was as if the two men, having helped build a country, now sat on a porch across time, reflecting on what they had wrought. The final day, July 4, 1826. As the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence approached, Jefferson's health began to fail. He was bedridden, weak, and in pain, but he held on, hoping to see July 4th. On the morning of that day, July 4, 1826, Thomas Jefferson whispered his last words. "Is it the 4th?" He died a few hours later at Monticello, at the age of 83. In a remarkable twist of fate, John Adams died just hours later in Massachusetts. His last words were said to be, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." He did not know his old friend had already passed. Two founding fathers, architects of American independence, had departed on the very day they had helped make sacred. The nation mourned, and the legend of Jefferson was sealed into the fabric of America. Legacy of a founding visionary. Thomas Jefferson was a man of contradictions and convictions, brilliant, complex, and deeply human. He authored some of the most powerful words of liberty ever written, even as he struggled with the moral weight of slavery. He helped birth a republic rooted in reason and freedom, yet left unanswered questions that still echo today. He was a philosopher in politics, a scientist in society, and a farmer in the presidency. His mind ranged across disciplines, and his vision extended far beyond his time. He believed in progress, self-governance, and the enduring promise of education. Jefferson's image has adorned currency, monuments, and countless schools. His words are quoted by both revolutionaries and presidents. Yet his story, like the country he helped create, is still being written, still being re-examined. In his own epitaph, Jefferson asked not to be remembered as a president, but as the author of the Declaration of Independence, the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and the father of the University of Virginia.